I'm Father Thomas Kane. I'm on the faculty of the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry and the director of Paulist Reconciliation Ministries. On behalf of the Paulist and Boston College, I'd like to welcome you all today to this symposium, Healing God's People. Reconciliation and healing in our church and in our world seems high on many agendas, and it's heartening to see so many people coming today to reflect on this important ministry, both within our church, and within our world, and within our neighborhoods. I'd like to thank Melinda Brown Donovan from the Continuing Education of the School of Theology and Ministry, my co-worker who will be here this afternoon doing the introductions, and also Barbara Ratke from Church 21 Online. I'd like to begin with a prayer for reconciliation. If you open your booklets, you'll find an icon card and a prayer on the back. I'd like to encourage you to do this prayer at home, in your parishes. So let us pray. God of compassion, you sent Jesus to proclaim a time of mercy, reaching out to those who had no voice, releasing those strapped by their own shame, and welcoming those scorned by society. Make us ambassadors of reconciliation. Open our ears that we may listen with respect and understanding. Touch our lips that we may speak words of peace and forgiveness. Warm our hearts that we may bring wholeness to the brokenhearted and dissolve the barriers of division. Guide the work of your church and renew us with the spirit of your love. Help us and all people shape a world where all will have a place, where the flames of hatred are quenched, where all can grow together as one. Forgive, restore, and strengthen us through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. In addition to a wonderful panoply of speakers and workshop presenters, we are also pleased to have with us today Professor Thomas Groom from our school in the Department of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry. Professor Groom will be helping us through the day with reflections and also processing with us. So at the end of this session, Tom will help us reflect on our keynote speaker. As you know, the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry is new to the campus. We're over on the Brighton campus. You're on the Newton campus. There's also the Chestnut Hill campus, which most of you think of probably as Boston College. We're on the other side in Brighton, in a beautiful new building. And we have a new dean this year who came to us from Fordham University. And I'd like to introduce him. He'll welcome you and introduce our speaker, Dean Mark Massa of the Society of Jesus.
Good morning. I'm delighted you're with us, and the School of Theology and Ministry is delighted to help host this conference. When I entered a meeting at Fordham University, where I was for 23 years, my first task was to scan the room and look for Peggy Steinfels, because she is the master of color commentary for the administrative talking heads present, which now includes me. She is also the queen of all she surveys. I'm pretty sure you're in for a treat this morning. Margaret O'Brien Steinfels is the co-director of the Fordham Center on Religion and Culture, and most recently host to a conference entitled Lost 20-somethings and the Church, a two-day conference at Fordham which attracted over 600 people. From 1988 to 2002, she was the editor of Commonweal magazine, and now she has emerged as a top-notch blogger on the Commonweal blog site. You might want to go there and check for yourselves. She has edited a slew of magazines, including Christianity and Crisis, Church Magazine, and has written for The New Republic, the National Catholic Reporter, the Los Angeles Times, the Miami Herald, and the New York Times Book Review. She is the author of Who's Minding the Children? The History and Politics of Daycare in America, published by Simon & Schuster. And just as importantly, I always thought, she serves as the hostess for the most interesting and fun New Year's Day party in New York City with her husband Peter in their West Side Manhattan apartment. Invitations to that party are as sought out as invitations to private papal audiences. As in addition to the great food and people present, every guest is allowed to take home one book from the huge floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that cover their half-block-long corridor of books. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you one of America's great Catholic public intellectuals and my friend, Peggy Steinfels.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I want to say that unlike papal audiences, our party welcomes anybody who shows up at the door, so help yourself. When I was planning on coming up here, of course, checked the weather report and found out that you all were going to have 5 inches of snow Friday night and Saturday. So I was prepared to congratulate you all for digging out and coming this morning, but it seems as though there was a change in the weather, so I want to know why you are all here on such a beautiful day. The title of this morning's sermon, Restoring Trust, came from the organizers of the conference, and when they proposed that I speak on the subject, I said, well, sure, why not? We're all in favor of trust, and who could doubt that trust needs restoring? And not only, of course, in the Catholic Church. But when I began to actually get down to work and think about what to say this morning, that proposition, restoring trust, became a problem to me. And an obvious question came to mind, and maybe it came to yours as well. Trust in what? Trust in whom? If trust has been lost, and for good reason, why would we want to restore trust in someone or some group who have abused the trust we place in him, her, or them? Trust has been lost between clergy and bishops, laity and bishops, laity and laity, laity and clergy, and above all, I believe, probably between bishops and bishops. Furthermore, that loss of trust has become mixed in with the ferocious partisanship at work not only in our church, but in our culture and in our politics. But it is the church that is our major concern today. Why should we trust someone or something that has violated that trust? Whatever form of trust we had or thought we had in the good old days is not going to come back. And why not? Because more or less it was the wrong kind of trust. It was blind trust. It was trust on automatic pilot. Trust that we had little reason to question or recalibrate. I think we all, most of us, rightly assumed that you couldn't be a church, a parish, or a community when you didn't trust others' words and deeds. Skepticism and cynicism were not on offer as Christian virtues, even though there are Christians who are skeptical and cynical. We took people at their word on matters about which we should have been more questioning and critical. Trust was betrayed. I got a full sense of how badly that was betrayed in February, a long time ago, 2003, when I spoke with some trepidation here in Boston to a group of priests, Boston priests. I recall that they seemed a bit shell-shocked, and so was I. The bishops had met in Dallas in June 2002, and in February everyone was still dealing with the policy the bishops had set: zero-sum tolerance. News stories continued to expose claims of abuse, some of them very old, many beyond the statute of limitations. Grand juries issued findings that pointed to serious problems, but generally did not issue indictments. The fog of evasion and suspicions persists even today as the media recycles old cases and reports ones we have never heard about before. Bills to remove the statutes of limitations for clerical abusers continue to be introduced in state legislatures, and mine in New York. Some pass, some don't. Several dioceses have declared bankruptcy. Policies to protect children and remove abusers from ministry are in place and enforced in most, but apparently not everywhere. The Catholic Church still grapples with the fallout. In the last year, revelations of the same problems in Ireland, Belgium, and Germany made very big headlines and have raised the specter of evasion and suspicions all the way to the Vatican, in case you didn't have them before. And now we read that Philadelphia has been called to account by a second grand jury. It seems to me it will be a very, very long time, if ever, before this matter is put to rest. If nothing else, this history and these continuing revelations point to the drawback of using the word, as in our title, restore. Is it a restoration we need? Or do we need a new understanding of trust in circumstances where trust was lost for good reason, perhaps no more so than here in Boston? So I'd like to proceed on two fronts. First, somewhat briefly, I'd like us to think about ways of becoming trustful again, other than returning to the status quo ante. We can't simply declare that it's time to restore trust and then magically pull it out of the hat. And then second, I'd like us to consider what it might mean for trust to exist again, but trust of a very different kind. As I hope to show, that would mean looking at our tradition and imagining how it could look in the future and at how it might be found trustworthy. So first, something about trust and the nature of trust. The form of trust many Catholics had in the past was blind trust. It was trust on automatic pilot. Humans trust because otherwise we couldn't walk out the front door. We trust because we expect the same today as we had yesterday. This may be, I think, the most common form of trust we experience, but it cannot be our most basic understanding of trust. For example, we trust that we are standing on solid ground and can walk straight ahead until the earth heaves, as it did in Japan on March 11th. Think of the Japanese, even now, so many weeks later, wondering how many shocks they're going to have today. Consider another example common to many. We trust that our life, our work, our family life will proceed in the future much as it has in the past. That is, until it doesn't. We lose our jobs, one of the children is hurt in an accident, the house burns down. Our trust that ordinary life goes on has been disrupted. We become disoriented and must find new ways to orient our decisions, our actions, our daily life. In 1959, when John the 23rd became Pope, everyone trusted and expected that the church would go on just as it had under Pius XII. But that's not what happened. John decided to call a council of bishops, Vatican II. From that experience, the church had to look to new ways to orient itself. How we Catholics understood our church, participated in our liturgy, read the scriptures. In fact, to read the scriptures at all as Catholics. How we saw ourselves in relationship to others, other religions, other people, understood other non-Western cultures in religion. In fact, we had to reorient ourselves in how we saw ourselves in relation to our own culture. Those who lived through this, myself included, and I suspect many of you, found it a heady and heartening experience, but also one that required a lot of reorienting and reinventing. There was certainly an analogous pattern in 1989 when the countries of Eastern and Central Europe declared their independence from the Soviet Union. Václav Havel, one of the leaders of the Velvet Revolution and later president of the Czech Republic, wrote before and after about the mentality of people who live on automatic pilot, who trusted their everyday experience to go on as it had. Most were content to live passively and unhappily under the Soviet system. As Havel wrote, They had learned to live a lie, to pretend to trust their neighbor, their leaders, to accept the experience of their everyday lives. This attitude was summed up in the joke, "You pretend to pay us, and we'll pretend to work." Blind trust can rest on a lot of pretending. But in 1989, as we know, the Czechs and Poles, among others, stopped pretending that they would go on as they had. Instead, they embarked on a new path. And one of Havel's resonant phrases for this was living in truth, by which he meant an attempt to gain control over one's own sense of responsibility. And isn't that what we see today in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and other countries of the Middle East? An attempt to gain control over one's own sense of responsibility. In our current Catholic circumstances, isn't that what we're trying to do? Gain control over our own sense of responsibility for the church. We yearn to be part of a church that we can trust because we want to take responsibility for being the church, shaping the church, and doing the church. And it's a big order. How are we going to do that? Now, my second and longer point. How are we going to exercise our own responsibility to have a church that we can trust? How could this become a church worthy of our trust, a newfound trust? What do we have to work with? In his book, The Reinvention of Tradition, Mark's former colleague at Fordham and mine now, Terence Tilley, writes in his book, religious tradition is best understood as an enduring practice or set of practices including a vision, attitudes, and patterns of action. This approach, he says, presumes that knowing a tradition is knowing how to live in and live out a tradition. If traditions are recognized to be networks of enduring practices, then one knows them when one knows how to participate in them. How do we do this? Live in and live out the tradition of our church in this culture and in these circumstances. As all of you, I'm sure, who studied Latin, I'm sure all of you did study Latin, know tradition is from traditio, to pass on. This means a tradition requires communication, verbally, kinesthetically, pedagogically, all sorts of ways, as Tilley emphasizes in defining how we participate or practice a tradition. A simple example. A parent passes on the sign of the cross to a child, first perhaps by blessing them on the forehead, and then taking their small hand and tracing the sign of the cross while saying the words, and later asking the child to imitate those gestures. The sign of the cross is well established in our tradition, but if you have ever tried to teach a small child this, you know how many details it turns out have to be mastered. How many variants are possible? Parents are passing the sign of the cross on from one generation to the next, and if we're lucky, they grow up and ask us what it means. Another example, our easy habit of dropping money in the collection basket. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big. But until recently, we probably spent more time thinking about how much we should put in, 5 cents or $5 or $50, than thinking about where it went. What was it used for? If we are responsible, or if we are to become responsible, we should expect that there is a parish budget available and that it is followed by a year-end report. How much came in? How much went out? How was it spent? This is not to make us mean, miserly, or critical, but it is to make the parish accountable and parishioners knowledgeable about its income and expenses, and ditto the archdiocese and diocese. So in this effort at reinventing and reimagining, I am not talking about creeds and dogmas. I am not talking about seizing power from the curia, although I suppose there are some here who have plans like that. And I am not even talking about resurrecting the ancient practice of electing bishops. Instead, I want us to look closer to home. What's right in front of our own noses? Our American Catholic culture, its infrastructure, its institutions, its people, and its practices. These are the ground level matters for which we should and could become responsible. I'd like us to think about putting our efforts into what is most important and giving a thought about how to live in, live out, and pass on this tradition, a tradition for which we should take responsibility, a tradition which we and our children can come to trust because we know it and live it. So there are a number of categories that it seems to me you all know as well as I do, and I will just sort of go through them. There are institutions we could pay attention to. There are people that we should know about, and there are practices that we should think about. And it seems to me the two important institutions I'd like us to think about are Catholic colleges and universities and Catholic parishes. Catholic colleges and universities are both a source and a means for reinvention. A source because that's where the Catholic Church does its thinking. Yes, it really does do its thinking there and not someplace else. They are a means, colleges and universities are a means because they educate the young at a critical moment in their formation. They gather and support learned faculties and others able to think and teach. And then they convene public forums for ongoing analysis and conversation, exactly what Boston College is doing here today. While they are autonomous institutions of learning, Catholic colleges and universities have commitments and ties to the Catholic Church and the Catholic tradition. These institutions have resources, knowledge, staff, money, libraries, and faculty, people who are actually paid to think and to teach. Aren't you? Yes? And finally, they stand with the young, as Margaret Mead once wrote, on the cliff of the new. Are Catholic schools doing their job? Well, as you all know, this is a disputed question. Some say they have strayed far from the Catholic Church and the tradition, yet others say Catholic schools preserve a distinctive Catholic presence. Theology departments and philosophy departments, Catholic studies programs, and centers like the one I co-direct at Fordham and which are replicated in many schools across the country. Programs like this one that prepare people for ministry. Is this enough? Probably not. What else could they be doing? Well, for one thing, it seems to me exercising the critical thinking they seem to urge on their students. Not long ago, I heard a heartfelt critique from a policy expert in Washington, and as well as a social justice activist, of programs that invite college students to do good works without giving them the intellectual and analytic tools to know what they are doing and why they are doing it. Community service, global service, is an important part of the educational enterprise these days. But is doing good self-explanatory? Where does the Catholic tradition, the social justice tradition, fit? Will the gradual diminution of undergraduate theology courses or electives on world religions allow Catholicism or the Catholic intellectual tradition to flourish among new generations in the coming decades? Faculty administrators, campus ministry have to be convinced that Catholicism has a serious tradition and should be taken seriously. Now, as we all know, schools have many distractions and claims on time and resources. The honorary degree debate, for one, is always something to look forward to in May. Let's see who gets called out this year. Sometimes generating a fight with the alumni or the local bishop. Another serious responsibility is making non-Catholic faculty and administrators welcome in a school with a Catholic tradition and integrating them into the mission of the school. This impulse is a good one to be welcoming and should not obscure the need for active, intelligent, scholarly Catholics along with non-Catholic sympathizers who form a coherent and critical mass in all parts of the university and not simply the theology department. The critical and focused work of educating the next generation is a piece of reinventing the Catholic tradition, so long as it does really, traditio, pass on and serve as both an orientation and a counterpoint to the larger culture. In reaction to what some see as a loss of identity, Catholic identity, there is a temptation to project a certitude and a definitiveness that is a substitute for taking responsibility for the new questions and conditions that are at hand and that we must use to engage the tradition. Second, there are parishes, the heart and soul of Catholic communal practice. Mass, baptisms, Eucharist, confirmations, marriage, sacrament of the sick, the RCIA, and all important and more frequent in my life anyway, funerals. They are often the social center of many neighborhoods with its coffee hours, meeting spaces, educational purposes, organizing capacities, and the willingness to welcome others to use their facilities. The center of the church, yes, but for some Catholics, and too many perhaps, the parish is the source of their discontent, even the occasion for their departure from Catholic practice. A good pastor is replaced by an idiot. Wow. I guess you all know about that. Inspiring sermons become harangues. Factionalism, internal or external disputes divide the community. We all know good reasons, have had good reasons for leaving parishes that test our faith rather than enrich it. There are many reasons that people abandon bad parishes for a university liturgy or who travel great distances for a good sermon or a breathtaking liturgy. And sadly, or some of them sadly abandon the liturgy and the church altogether. This is why we should value and support good parishes, parishes that build up community, inspire practice, enrich our belief, and reinvent the Catholic tradition every Sunday, and sometimes during the week. There are sociological as well as religious, theological, and spiritual reasons we should protect, promote, and support good parishes by our engagement and by our money, and our talents. Why? Above all, because it's there. It actually exists. We don't have to start from scratch. It is local, and it immerses us in local knowledge. Local knowledge is what people on the ground in the neighborhood know, what Catholics pick up and absorb from going to church on Sunday. And many of you may know a book by the anthropologist Clifford Geertz called Local Knowledge, in which he emphasizes the singular and inescapable nature of how and what each of us know about the world around us. He writes, "The shape of knowledge are always ineluctably local, indivisible from their instruments and their encasements. One may veil this fact," he writes, "with rhetoric or blur it with theory, but one cannot really make it go away. For all the talk of globalization, the local provides the actual, concrete, knowable, which points to the doable." And why do I emphasize this? Local communities, real communities exist. Most of us belong to some of them, a parish above all. Parishes are among the most important of those places. At Sunday Mass, we actually experience something missing from our day-to-day, discontinuous, disembedded, reflexive lives. Sunday morning is the time when people turn off their cell phones, stash the iPod, take off their earphones, and leave the laptops at home, unless you're a postmodern church. Sunday mornings are the time, maybe the one and only time in the week, when most of us belong to a community, face to face, eye to eye, elbow to elbow. Where else do most of us ever sing together, pray together, stand and kneel together, look someone in the eye and say, "Peace of Christ"? Where else do we celebrate the real presence? Where else do we hear, "Love thy neighbor, do good to those who hate you, remove the beam from your own eye before plucking out the one in your sister's"? For many people, many of us, Sunday worship is an oasis in a desert of alienation, anxiety, and apathy. In other words, the counterpoint to the discontinuous, disembedded, and reflexive modern world in which we live. As Sunday moves out of the sanctuary into the larger parish, the neighborhood, and the workplaces, into Monday and Tuesday, we should bring that experience of a living local community into our everyday lives. We have to keep putting odd things together, reconciling the irreconcilable. Reconcile means to overcome the animosity of someone, to turn distrust into trust, to attempt to make compatible conflicting ideas, goals, persons. That's one of the tasks of a good parish. Teaching us to fit things together, learning to run counter to American culture while being part of it, visiting the sick, praying for the dead, driving carefully, giving way gracefully to a rude person, talking to a scary teenager with purple hair and 20 nose rings, lending money to a friend, comforting the afflicted, especially when their afflictions are self-generated. There is a long list of things to do: the commandments, the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, lessons from our mothers and fathers. This isn't old-fashioned, nor is it postmodern. It is a way to live in and live out the tradition, to seize the initiative, take the first step, offer the first gesture. So we have institutions, and then we have people. The demographics of the Catholic Church is broad, varied, challenging, and always changing. The people of God are in crisis for many reasons and have been described by many people in articles in Commonweal, America, on various blogs, in the NCR. Richard Geyer-Dietz had one recently. My husband, Peter Steinfels, has written several. John Allen writes them from time to time, and even I have written these. And so everybody knows there's a lot of things wrong, and everybody's got a lot of ideas what it is. Even the Archbishop of Dublin recently gave a talk that said the important thing, or the title of his talk anyway, was keeping the show on the road, which suggests he's not so enthused about how things are either. In the U.S., there is shrinkage of the Catholic population in some places and growth in others. There are fewer clergy and religious in many places. There are parish closings in the urban north and new parishes being built in the south and west. The linkage between clergy shortage and closing a parish is problematic, especially when there remains a community able and willing to continue the work of the parish. In some places, this is taken into consideration, in other places not. In this dynamic demographic shift, the laity can play an enormous role in reinventing the tradition. So point one, reinvention is up to us, even though we be a motley crew. There are those who are active and participate, to whom the job falls of doing serious reinventing. We need to take this job to heart, define it thoughtfully, and carry it out gracefully. It can't be done out of anger or resentment or with ideological intent. It's time for adult lay Catholics to assess what is possible with their local knowledge and then put it to use. It is a spiritual task as well as a sociological one to take responsibility for what is at hand. It means thinking about the Catholic tradition and the demographics of it, the variety and the diversity. There are the Catholics who leave the church, former Catholics so-called, now the second largest religious group in America after practicing Catholics. It's always nice to be second if you're as well as first, I guess. No doubt some of our best friends are among this crowd, even family members. Something like half of our departed brothers and sisters join another religious community. Another half remains unaffiliated. I think we should regard and treat them as members of the community. Unaffiliated doesn't make them atheists, even when they say none, N-O-N-E, not none. We should always be welcoming of them. Some of the most challenging conversations I have are with friends and neighbors who have dropped out. Conversations about why, about what they miss, about what they are glad to be rid of. We should be in conversation with those who have left, in conversations with those who are doing good, as Episcopalians, Methodists, Lutherans, etc. Maybe we can learn something about reinventing Catholic while talking to them. And then there are the converts, people new to Catholicism who sometimes become Catholic with a vengeance. I guess you've met these folks too. I say with a vengeance, especially if they are on the lam from another Christian church that they think has violated basic teachings. Pick one. Sometimes recent converts to Catholicism take upon themselves the defense of a faith they often know little about. But isn't that what the RCIA does? The sacramental vehicle for teaching and welcoming new members. Does that spirit of inquiry and the desire for true conversion persist after Pentecost? Or do the Catholic culture wars get another recruit? These new members should be welcomed into an ongoing learning community that includes all of us, cradle Catholics as well as newbies. Adult Catholicism is a state and experience we all need to get better at. The Church in the United States still wrestles with this problem of recognizing itself as a religion for adults. Another way to see the demographic dynamic and diversity of Catholicism is to look at it through the categories of generation, ethnicity, and gender. The data on generational differences among Catholics is now well established, and I'm sure you know all these books and these ideas. Significant changes in attitudes and practice are apparent for at least 3 generations: pre-Vatican II, born before 1940, Vatican II, 1940 to 1960, and post-Vatican II, born after 1960. These 3 have now been joined by a 4th generation, sometimes called the millennials. And by the 20-year calculation on which these are based, there is yet another generation in the making, my grandchildren for one. There are significant identity differences among these cohorts about belief and practice. The oldest cohort being most likely to be regular Mass attenders, the youngest adults least likely. This diverse population presents challenges to all Catholic institutions and to the tradition itself. I'll go out on a limb here and say that I think the future of the Church rests at the moment on the willingness and ability of the Vatican II generation, most of us, to stay the course and to hold things together until something else happens. From my years at Commonweal, I am conscious that there is a challenge for all Catholic institutions, all forms of Catholic media, as well as parishes, to find and hold younger readers and members. Connecting to Catholic colleges and universities, as well as Catholic chaplaincies at secular schools, is key to finding them and recruiting them, whether as parishioners, donors, or readers. More important, they have to become part of reinventing the tradition. Here, internships and recruiting younger editors, as at Commonweal, is a small piece of the puzzle. Parishes must make room for everybody, married, unmarried, gay, straight. Make room for them on some of their own terms, and not just on our own. Then there is the ethnic question. The Catholic Church in the U.S. is increasingly Latino, including especially Mexicans and in New York, Dominicans, along with significant numbers of people from Central and South America. Add the Portuguese from Brazil, the Vietnamese, Filipinos, Southeast Asians, and Central and Eastern Europeans. In some ways, these immigrants replicate the immigrant past of U.S. Catholicism. They keep the church young and vital. Immigrants and their children keep the church growing. In fact, without them, the Catholic Church in the United States would be shrinking. But they come into a church that is very different from the parishes of our immigrant parents and grandparents. Many immigrants come from strong Catholic communities, while others, though baptized, have had little real contact with the church. Culture, language, poverty, and general otherness are challenges that some parishes try to meet while others can't or don't. But no one can ignore these newcomers. A theme of a forum we had last spring called Becoming Latino, the Catholic Church in the United States, there was general recognition that we, the children and great-grandchildren of immigrants, are setting the table for them now, for the newcomers. Tomorrow they will be in charge of setting the table for us and for our children. To what degree will the new ethnics fit into established Catholic patterns? To what degree will they develop their own? Latinos are a growing percentage of the U.S. Catholic population, 35 to 40%. Before long, obviously, they will constitute more than half of the Catholic population. Will English language institutions, parishes, universities, publications make their way into the lives of second and third generation ethnics? Or will Latinos develop new patterns and their own vehicles for assimilation or integration? Immigrants are an integral part of a reinvention of Catholicism. And just as they are part of U.S. Catholicism, they are part of U.S. culture. What do they bring to our country and our church? What can we give? What can we receive? And then, of course, there is the perennial favorite question, gender, women. What a paradox. Though many women are alienated from the church, women are the largest proportion of parish and diocesan staffs, the heart of any Catholic volunteer effort, the mainstay of liturgical ministry and catechetics. This continues the pattern of religious sisters who single-handedly built most Catholic institutions, schools, hospitals, and social welfare agencies. The decline in the number of women religious is certainly a major part of what is called the clergy crisis. Is it too strong to say that many religious women have been driven from the work of the church by the indifferent and sometimes hostile attitude of some in the clergy and hierarchy? And the current inquiry by Rome of women's religious communities contributes to a sense, I think, of ingratitude and alienation. The alienation of many lay women goes wide and deep. In my view, it is the source of the religious illiteracy that is described among younger Catholics. You cannot pass on or teach what you don't any longer believe. There is certainly a sign of this in baby boomers, that is, post-Vatican II Catholic women, but it is probably more pronounced in their daughters among the millennials. Many young and youngish Catholic women seem not to have, and I've heard testimony about this from campus ministers and college teachers, they do not seem to have a deep interest in the church of their childhood or knowledge of its teaching and practices. The ordination question and related gender issues separate the church from the almost universal practice of their culture and their experience. Those women who don't practice Catholicism in any significant way are unlikely to go on being active members of Catholic faculties, parishes, and other Catholic efforts. That might mean the wealth of laborers, both paid and volunteers, the church continues to draw on may be coming to an end. On the other hand, I've had this other thought, and I could be wrong about this, but let me try it on you. There is an alternative possibility. Unencumbered by the experience of the old Catholic subculture, both positive and negative, some younger women may be free to think more energetically and creatively about reinventing new forms of Catholic culture. They, along with their male peers, just don't care about the battles of the past. I've met such young people, some of them refreshingly candid about where they stand. And they say they have no interest in the fights of the past. Well, we'll see about that. But it is interesting that they understand that there are fights of the past that are affecting the current moment. I just want to touch briefly on some other kinds of organizations, and very briefly, I see my time is flying. New groupings of Catholics, usually small and committed, doing very specific things. The alumni of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps or the Holy Cross Volunteer Corps who continue to have a kind of community and to meet. There are intentional communities of prayer, of hospitality, of good works, the San Egidio community, which is established in New York now. Catholics who have retired from their jobs and who offer their expertise, time, and energy to enterprises that can use their experience and skills. The Senior Jesuit Volunteer Corps, for example, is very active in New York and Middle Atlantic states. I don't know. There might be some of you in Boston. There are the Cristo Rey schools, the Nativity schools, the new religious movements. Some are more traditional. Some, as they say, are leaning into the future. Another group to consider, and I think I might just drop this for time reason, is the issue of foreign-born clergy and the both positive and negative issues that raises for reinventing Catholicism. And I will skip my examples. There have to be ways to address some of these issues, including, I think, dioceses should cease to look at foreign priests as priests on the cheap. And I think that is behind some of this. There have got to be other ways to compensate for the declining number of American priests. Then there are our native-born clergy and bishops who are a problem in themselves. And I sometimes feel that all we can do is to encourage the good and avoid the not so good. Many active Catholics are fixated on the bishops and clergy, and they are angry at them. In many ways, the hierarchy is a mess. They are not what they once were, men of the people. One observation, which I really thought hit this on the head, was from a priest friend who, apropos of the decision of Bishop Darcy to absent himself from the Notre Dame commencement 2 years ago, said this: "As for his decision and many similar actions by hierarchs, I wish some bishop would stand up on the floor of the conference and say, 'Brothers, once when bishops leveled penalties, the effect was to isolate the miscreant from society. Now the effect seems to be to isolate us. Before we take that as a sign of how close to perdition everyone else is, perhaps we should think about our own inadequacies in dealing with the world around us.'" Well said, I thought. So, but that being said, recognize that bishops and priests, especially priests, are caught in the same state of discontinuity, disembeddedness, and reflexivity. They live in the same aura of mistrust, perhaps even more so, as the rest of us. At the same time, they have to act as if they know what's happening, what's going on. Some resist this situation by insisting on a return to a lost social order. Others grapple with the same confusion and complications that we do. When it is possible, we should join in their efforts. We should try to help before we criticize. When we can't, we can't. In my own parish, there are some things I wish we did differently. And I tell my pastor so. On the other hand, I think everyone is doing their best in the circumstances, especially our pastor. Finally, there are lots of practices that we could think about again, apart from their culture war implications. Are there new ways of using old practices and objects as well as incorporating new ideas and practices? One of the problems for Christianity, especially Catholicism, is that it's been around so long. And many of its sacred objects have become art. And you have to go to the world's great museums to see them. There it is hard to feel the aura of their sacredness. They do not evoke the prayerful feelings and thoughts they once did. Maybe some of these should be repatriated to churches and other sacred places. Practices that once enriched the lives of Catholics, fasting, saying the rosary, perpetual adoration, have become part of the liberal conservative fight in the church. Sorry, I've lost my place. Oh, that was followed by a question. Is that necessary? I think we need to rethink these things. People still go on retreats, but some sound like self-improvement schemes. Are there ways to have a variety of different kinds of retreats? Prayer, fasting, meditation, pilgrimages are practices that need reimagining and reinvention. I suggest our attitude toward all of these and others I don't even know about should be the test of Gamaliel. Is it the work of God? Will this be perfection, what I am proposing here? No. Will it create a perfect church? Not in this world. These are tasks that should be undertaken with modesty and a sense of humility that reflect the words of Gaudium et Spes. The church, at once a visible organization and a spiritual community, travels the same journey as all humankind and shares the same earthly lot with the world. It is to be 11. I just want to end with a reminder of a story we all know, Luke 5:18. Some men were carrying on a bed a man who was paralyzed, and they were trying to bring him in and to set him down in front of Jesus. But not finding any way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down through the tiles with his stretcher into the middle of the crowd in front of Jesus. Seeing their faith, he said, "Friends, your sins are forgiven you." So, imagine this. The church is the man who was paralyzed. Imagine that we are the friends of this man. The church needs to be healed. We must carry the church if it is to be healed. I have tried to suggest ways that each of us could do this by reinventing the tradition, by knowing how to live in and live out the tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, for painting a landscape for our reconciliation and offering some creative ways for us to continue this work of restoration. To continue our conversation, I'd like to invite Professor Groom up, who will help us through a process during the day to reflect and integrate what we're learning together as a group. Tom Groom.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Peggy. Just a spectacular presentation. Delightful, faithful, evocative, challenging, imaginative, all of the above. So thank you. Marvelous. Reconciliation surely involves conversation. Do I hear amen? Amen. Yeah. So let's have a little bit of conversation before we re-engage Peggy in some conversation as well. Take your pen and paper. If you don't have one, borrow one, or put up your hand, we'll bring one to you. Or borrow a page from the neighbor's book or whatever. Take a pen and paper, and we're just going to take a quiet minute or two and just sift through for yourself what emerges for you from Peggy's marvelous presentation. What do you want to take to heart? What seems most important to you? What seems wise, insightful? What would you love to take away with you and integrate into your own faith life, into your own ministry, parenting, practices, whatever it might be? So in other words, what's the gold dust that you're taking from this presentation and your own reflection upon it? I'll be quiet and let you take notes from yourself, the most important notes you will take today. Well, now, our beloved Pope John the 23rd, whom Peggy cited, was fond of saying that you cannot see eye to eye unless you come face to face. Well, physically that's certainly true. So let's come face to face with a neighbor. Turn to a neighbor for a few minutes, take about 4 or 5 minutes, so you only have about 2 minutes each after saying hello. Now, if you drew a blank in response to my question, that's a sure sign you should turn to the neighbor. Because the neighbor always comes up with something. In other words, if you don't feel like talking to the neighbor, don't. but do be willing to listen. So turn to the neighbor and just say, huh? I bet they'll start talking. They always have something to say. Let's go to work. 5 minutes.
Well, I hope the conversation will go on and on through the day, and there'll be lots of more opportunities. So if you didn't say everything this time, keep a little and for the next time, because you'll be with the neighbor again in a little while. And Randy has a microphone, and I have one as well. So we'll try to, since the space is large, we'll try to get a microphone to you. Let's invite Peggy back to the podium, and I'll be the traffic cop for a little while. And let's hear your wisdom, your insights, your commitments, what's emerging for you. Of course, if there are questions for Peggy, put them to her, but I'm sure she would welcome your answers as well.
Yes, especially your answers.
Let's begin the conversation with the whole community. Who would like to start the ball rolling for us? A contribution? Here you are. Let me bring this to you.
One of the things I had to let go of is, not let go of, but accept the ideas of the millennia people. I have a grandniece who I suggested go to Arch Street for Mass. She went, and she did not care for it. I love it. And I need more conversation with her, but it's accepting where they are and how they believe at this point in time.
Thank you. Another comment here? Peggy, you come in and comment anytime the Spirit moves you. Whenever she moves you, you comment.
In our conversation, we came up with some images of a medical model. And the medical model looked at what's wrong with the system. And we know what's wrong with the church. We know what's wrong with the parish. And as we ended our conversation, I was thinking of it in contrast with a relational model that looks at wholeness and looks at what's right in relationship and building relationship and using images that build relationship to move forward.
I'll go back to the first comment. I am the mother of 2 children born in the late 60s and the grandmother of 2 children who are, born in this century. And I have found, as you have, that it doesn't pay to insist that you are right, even when you are. But I have found as well that a little bit of gentle cajoling and coaxing and reminding people of the things they got. And I'm talking now about my daughter. And so I was a bit more aggressive than usual with her. When our grandson started first grade, in a public school in New York, I decided I would find the closest CCD class. And I did. And for the first year, I went downtown and picked him up from school and took him every week. Now, no one objected to this, including him, because it turned out all of the classmates from the CCD were his classmates from the public school. And so as time has gone on, they have all gotten to CCD, and you don't know what's the trajectory of this exactly, except the CCD is a place they like, the guy who runs it they like. And so I think it's both letting go and keeping a hand in somehow, as appropriate.
Thank you. There's a hand here, and Randy has one over there. We'll take that side of the church for a moment.
In your talk, you said that one of the things we should do is hold things together until something good comes next. And I would like to suggest
it could be something bad that comes next.
Well, maybe something bad. My wife and I are both married Catholic priests, and we co-pastor a community that meets every week for Eucharist. And I think that these grassroots communities are the way that the faith is going to be kept alive. And to expect things to be coming down from the top, that's not my experience of that happening. And so I think that whatever we can do, either to recreate our own parishes or to start new vibrant faith communities where people own their own faith, I think that that's the way we're going to move into the future.
I agree.
There's one here. Thank you. Here you go.
I'm Sharon Dickinson, and the psychotherapist David Richo, who's a former priest, is a person I really like to read a lot. And he maintains that in order to have a healthy childhood, you need to experience attention, affection, appreciation, acceptance, and then be allowed to move on into adulthood. And I believe that there are elements of that here that we all need to look to one another, to those who are older than us, those who are younger than us, those who are Catholic and non-Catholic, and express and receive love, which is to say affection, appreciation, which is to say value one another, attention, which means listening, making that eye contact that you talked about. What were the other one? And then, looking around the room, I would say that we need to allow the next generation. I'm thinking that there aren't too many of the next generation in this room. Allow them to take on and pass it along.
Thank you. Another comment coming. Maybe Randy's got a hand here that I'm not seeing. Go ahead. And then we come back up here.
Hi, my name is Joan Horgan. I'm the Director of Pastoral Care for the Spalding Network. And thank you, Peggy, for a very hope-filled presentation. The gold dust that I took from your presentation was your closing sentence. We must carry the church if it is to be healed. And I was recently asked by the person I report to at Spalding, Joan, why does an intelligent woman like you still associate with the Catholic Church? And my response was, the Catholic Church to me is a family, a very dysfunctional family right now, like my family of origin. And there are two options. I can pack my bags and leave it, or I can stay within and try to heal it from within. And that's my option. And it's also based on the faith and the culture that I came out of in Ireland, which feels at times like it's part of my genetic code. And that's okay. But it's challenging, very challenging to remain in the Catholic Church. And of my 33 nieces and nephews, I'd say the majority are no longer churchgoers. But we're becoming very culturally diverse with Buddhist, my nieces and nephews marrying Buddhist people, Jewish people, non-baptized people, and we're welcoming them into our extended family. But moving forward, for me, it's stay within and work within the system and try to heal it and rebuild it from within. And that is my perspective and what I offer to patients who say they're of no religion, but they really have been brought up in a Catholic tradition. They say, I no longer go to church. I say, but that does not mean that you're not a very deeply spiritual person. Wonderful. And that going to church is only one way to express your faith. The most important way is how you treat each other.
Marvelous.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Peggy, response? Okay. More comments, insights? Maybe if you want to come down. Could you? Yeah, thank you. Well, we see. Look it. I'll meet you halfway. That's a new church, huh?
You made the comment that young women are unencumbered by the struggles of the past.
Some of them claim to be. That's all I...
One of the issues I see in that is how do we use that freedom for creativity while it seems that many of them are making the choices of the past that we have overcome. So some of the, for example, subservience, seeing themselves in a role that is less than in the church, taking on some of the traditions, And so there seems to be a struggle with the people who are looking for freedom who don't have a place to be creative, and the alternative is to look at the traditionalism.
Well, yes. I mean, this is part of the whatever we want to call this, the left-right divide, the liberal-conservative divide in the church, which is more pronounced in some places than others. And so, if I tell you that I live in New York City, you will not be surprised to find out that I don't meet many of those kinds of, people of that tendency. I actually have a fellow who's a good friend, a younger fellow, whose sister is very conservative, and he comes back from family events with, tales of the fights and arguments that go on in what is and was and is a very Catholic family. And that's how it is. I don't know what to say about that, except the business of trying to be as non-judgmental as possible when when faced with somebody who thinks perpetual adoration is 5 steps above the Mass. All you can do in some ways is sort of deal with that theologically and sociologically and psychologically, but if that's what they think, that's what they think. And I guess I'm with those who say that's what they think. And
if I could put in a quick word, just when Jim Fowler, this may not be helpful at all, but it does explain a little of what I think is going on with some of that extreme either-or. Fowler, when he outlined the stages of faith development, described a stage after the socializing stage, when you kind of simply accept the faith that you inherited. There is that moment in many people's lives when it becomes all or nothing, either or. Either it's all craziness and throw it away, or it was all wonderful and marvelous and let's embrace it totally and completely. And it is a transition time. Now, it can often last a long time. It can be a long transition. But if you stay with those people, at least this was Fowler's proposal, and invite them along, that sometimes the paradoxes of life will bring them to realize that there are shades of gray. There has to be a mediating position, that it can't be all or nothing. And they were all cafeteria Catholics, really, around whatever issues may be on the table. So I suppose pastorally, I still think it's possible to encourage such people to take the next step into a more paradoxical faith, into a more nuanced faith that will be much more life-giving for them. Because that all or nothing type of stance, that kind of hardened type of rigor, that type of, it can be smothering for people. So they may want to get out of that posture.
It's also important to see the way in which the larger culture is also beset by this kind of issue. And, different people go different routes, even in families, politically and culturally. And, one of the things that strikes me now about many people who we would describe as not just conservative, they're reactionary, politically and culturally, is I think we live, and they certainly feel it in spades, that we live in a very dangerous world. And this is a very besieged country. And I think you get this kind of reaction of pulling back, holding in, saving what you have, not trusting others who are not like you. And I can't help but feel a lot of the immigration debate rests on this kind of feeling that many people have, that they are besieged. And how, I think one deals with that in very, very different ways. And and I always say, we were the enemy in the 19th and early 20th century, right? Especially if you were Irish. And we should remember, We
Even
should
still.
remember our history when these questions come up, and people, they may not be convinced, they can be reminded of what their own parents, grandparents, at least on the immigration question, and one can look at all sorts of issues in our culture that get that same kind of response. Since I'm on the other part of the political spectrum, I guess I would say it is my responsibility to realize that not every liberal progressive item on everyone's agenda is for the good of the whole. It's not good for everybody. That there's got to be some self-criticism in everybody's political and cultural and religious outlook.
We've one more minute, and here's a hand right here in the front, so you're the nearest and dearest, so we'll give you the microphone.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marina Salazar. I'm in from New York City, St. Paul the Apostle Parish. I
Right
want to
across
thank
the street.
Yes, right from Fordham. You said something, and someone else also had a comment about your what you said about the Vatican II, or baby boomers, if you will, are going to carry the church until something good or bad happens. And I just want to thank you for helping me clarify something on a personal level, and that is, I sort of stumbled out of the young adult faction of the church and sort of skidded into middle age and began to wonder, wow, what's my place in the church now? Because the programming, as I hear it from the pulpit and what have you, is, are there young adults here? Anybody with kids? Blah, blah, blah. And, I started wondering, well, what about me? What do I do now? And I feel hope now. It's, if all I do is carry it in my heart and in my life, I think that is a ministry. And I think that was, came home to me when my daughter called me and she said, my granddaughter Maggie, she's like, she's this, she's that. And Mom, she has a lot of your spirit, so I'm going to need you to spend a lot of time with her.
Sounds like she's energetic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Peggy and Tom, for continuing the conversation. These are important informational items. The restrooms are located down the corridor to the corner. The speakers and workshop presenters have given us a selection of books, and on the way to the restrooms, you'll also find our bookstore. So you have a shopping opportunity today. We are going to reconvene in our workshop breakout groups at 10:45. There's coffee, and I'm going to just tell you where they are. Everyone has their first choice, and if you check in your packet, you'll see the theme and the room, but I'm just going to review them quickly. Rodney Peterson, Healing and Interfaith Perspective, room 115. Francine Cardman, Practicing Hope, room 120. Thomas Porter, Restorative Justice, room 100. They're all on the first floor. Clarence Williams, Social Sobriety. You can take the elevator up to 4. It's room 400. And Ernesto Valiente, Theology of Reconciliation, on the second floor in room 200. The rooms are just stacked above each other. Please follow the signs. We have grad assistants. They'll be happy to help you point your way. So we'll gather at 10:45 in our workshop groups.